On a foggy September morning in 1885, the sun barely managed to pierce the thick clouds that hung over the small town of Millstone, Massachusetts. The distant sound of a church bell echoed through the empty streets, breaking the unusual silence that enveloped the place. Something was wrong. The town, normally peaceful and quiet, was now gripped by growing panic. Sarah Whitaker, a girl of only 7 years old, had disappeared without a trace. Her mother, Elizabeth, had woken up early in the morning to find her daughter's bed empty, the door to her room ajar. Little Sarah never left home without telling anyone, and her sudden absence had generated a wave of fear. What disturbed the residents most was the fact that no one had heard anything during the night. No screams, no noise. Sarah seemed to have simply vanished. The local sheriff, Amos Calloway, a man of many years of service and little enthusiasm for unusual cases, soon called upon Samuel Roberts, a young detective from Boston, to investigate. Samuel had a natural talent for solving mysteries, but he was also skeptical, always believing that logic could explain anything. He didn't believe in ghosts or unexplained phenomena, and always preferred to rely on tangible evidence. "Does it make sense that she left alone?" the sheriff asked, offering a cup of coffee, while Samuel looked at the small brick house where the child lived. "Perhaps," Samuel replied, carefully observing the quiet street, as if some sign might suddenly appear. "But nothing about this case makes sense so far." Upon entering the house, Samuel noticed the marks on the windows, the back door open, but with no signs of forced entry. Apparently, no one had forced their way in, but the door was strangely open. The wall clock in the living room still showed 5:23 a.m., the same time the girl had disappeared, according to her mother's testimony. What caught Samuel's attention most was a letter on the dining table, a yellowed piece of paper with handwritten words. The signature was illegible, but the letter's contents seemed threatening. "She's yours. Keep your promise, or the next child will be yours." Samuel frowned. What did that mean? The letter didn't seem to be from someone who simply wanted to steal a child. There was something darker there. As the detective searched the girl's room, his mind raced. The fact that Sarah had disappeared without a trace of a struggle, which seemed like a sudden magical absence, defied any logical explanation. But Samuel didn't believe in coincidences. He felt compelled to find an explanation, something that made sense, something that wasn't just a trick of superstition. Then a voice caught his attention. A woman stood in the doorway, a strange figure he didn't recognize. Her eyes were deep and dark, and she approached with a piercing gaze. "Are you looking for the child?" she asked with a disturbing calmness. "I know what happened to her." Before Samuel could answer, the woman turned and walked slowly into the street, disappearing into the morning mist. "What do you think happened to the child? Could the letter be a clue to an even bigger mystery, or are we dealing with something supernatural?" Samuel Roberts couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper behind Sarah Whitaker's disappearance. The small, quiet town of Millstone had never been marked by events of this nature. He knew that what seemed to be a simple disappearance was rapidly turning into something far more sinister. After speaking with the mysterious woman, Samuel decided to take a step back and analyze the details that had previously gone unnoticed. He spent the rest of the morning and part of the afternoon questioning the townspeople, but everyone seemed as shaken as his mother. Nobody knew anything. The lack of concrete clues made everything even more enigmatic. However, during a conversation with the town doctor, Dr. Edwin Hayes, Samuel learned something interesting. "I saw the girl a few days ago," the doctor said with a serious look. "She was ill, yes, but nothing really worrying. But something strange happened the night before her disappearance. She came to see me alone in my office, saying she had seen something in the woods north of town. Something strange, as she herself put it." "Something strange?" asked Samuel, surprised. "She didn't want to tell me any more details." "I was intrigued." but she seemed genuinely scared. "I told her to go home and rest." That comment kept hammering in Samuel's head as he walked through the quiet streets of Millstone. The fact that Sarah had gone to the doctor on her own in the middle of the night was unexpected for a child her age. Something had bothered her, something that made her seek help. The question was, what? During his walk, Samuel noticed a small bookstore in the center of town, a shop almost forgotten by the locals. There was something peculiar about the place, as if time had stood still there. He went inside, hoping that the books, with their old stories and knowledge, might offer some clue. The bookstore owner, an elderly man named William Crane, was behind the counter. The name did not escape Samuel's notice. Crane was the man everyone was beginning to suspect, the stranger who had settled in town only a few months ago. "Good afternoon," Samuel greeted cautiously, observing the man with a serious expression. "Good afternoon, sir. Can I help you with anything?" William Crane replied in a hoarse, calm voice, his eyes fixed unperturbed on Samuel. "I was just passing by. I heard about a curious case here in town." "A child disappeared," Samuel replied, trying to gauge Crane's reaction. The man showed no surprise, but there was a faint glint in his eyes. "It's a tragedy, without a doubt. But things aren't always what they seem. Some say there's a greater mystery involved." Samuel felt a chill run down his spine. "Do you believe that?" he asked, his skepticism barely concealing. "I believe that some questions have answers that we can't easily understand," Crane replied, with an enigmatic, almost imperceptible smile. The conversation, though seemingly innocent, made Samuel uncomfortable. There was something strange about the way the man spoke, something that didn't fit with the calmness of his demeanor. As he left the bookstore, Samuel noticed a crucial detail. The trees around the city were beginning to be cut down, something that seemed simple, but which he only noticed at the right moment. They weren't old trees, but some medium-sized ones with neat cuts. This might seem irrelevant, but something in his mind alerted him to the possibility that these trees were connected to Sarah's disappearance. The city seemed to be changing little by little, and the changes, however subtle, were making Samuel uneasy. What else was he missing? Upon returning to the police station, he found a notice. A child from the neighboring town had disappeared in the same way. There were no traces, nothing. Do you think the tree cuts have anything to do with the disappearance? What else can Samuel discover about the mysterious man, William Crane? The atmosphere in Millstone seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Samuel Roberts could no longer shake the feeling that something was very wrong in the town. It wasn't just Sarah Whitaker's disappearance. Now, with another child gone missing in the neighboring town and the growing enigma surrounding William Crane, he sensed that something dark was unfolding right before his eyes. The town was beginning to shut down. The residents, who had initially rallied together in the search for the missing children, began to drift apart. Distrust was taking hold in Millstone, and this only increased the burden on Samuel. He didn't know who to trust anymore. The sheriff, Amos Calloway, seemed more concerned with the upcoming municipal elections than with the safety of his town. The other police officers were equally disheartened, unsure where to begin. That afternoon, Samuel decided to revisit Sarah Whitaker's house. The enigmatic letter was still on the dining table, and he wanted to take a closer look. Something about those words bothered him. Something that made him believe the disappearance was somehow connected to a deeper secret that no one had yet discovered. When he entered the house, he found a new detail. A window that had been left open during the initial investigation was now closed. No one in the house had touched it, and this made Samuel wonder if he was being watched. But by whom and why? The feeling of being watched continued to haunt him, but he knew he couldn't afford to doubt his own sanity. Samuel forced himself to move on and examine what else the house had to offer. That's when he found the book. It was hidden inside a cupboard at the back of the living room, covered by a dark leather cover. It wasn't an ordinary book, but an old volume that seemed out of place in the house. At the top of the cover, the words were engraved in Latin, Ars Arcanum, the Arcanum of Shadows. Samuel knew those words didn't mean something simple. It was a forbidden book, used by secret societies and occultists. How had such a bizarre item ended up there? Flipping through the pages, Samuel discovered several notes in the margins of the book. They were handwritten scribbles, words in Latin, but also some words in English that made no sense at all. The last note was the most disturbing. When the full moon rises, the veil between the worlds will be torn. That sentence, written urgently, seemed to echo in Samuel's mind, as if it had been written for him, as if it were a warning. Samuel didn't know if he believed in superstitions or supernatural things, but this seemed beyond what he could ignore. That book could be the key to understanding what was happening. Without wasting any time, Samuel rushed back to William Crane's bookstore. He needed answers, and the man might be the only person who knew anything about the book. However, when he entered the store, he realized Crane wasn't there. Instead, an elderly woman stood there, head bowed, organizing some papers. "I was waiting for you," she said with a strange smile as she saw Samuel enter. "How did you—" Samuel stopped, surprised. "William isn't here, but I knew you would come," the woman said with a disturbing calm. "You're looking for answers. I can give you some." Samuel didn't know whether he should believe her, but the woman seemed to know far more than she should. She pointed to a book on the top shelf, which looked dusty and old. It was the same book he had found in Sarah Whitaker's house. "This book is much more than it seems, young detective," said the woman, her voice now lower, almost a whisper. "The Arcanum of Shadows is the portal to a mystery that spans generations. What you are investigating is not a simple disappearance, but something much deeper, something that involves the very foundations of this city." The woman then looked into Samuel's eyes, hers now gleaming with a frightening intensity. "You are about to discover something that goes beyond logic, beyond reason. But be careful, detective. Not all secrets should be unearthed." Before Samuel could ask another question, she disappeared into the shadows of the shop, as if she had never been there. Samuel's mind was in turmoil. The woman's words haunted him. What did she mean by the foundations of the city? What was happening in Millstone? The search for Sarah Whitaker seemed to be only the beginning of something much bigger and much more dangerous. That night the full moon rose in the sky, and Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that the mystery was about to take a turn no one could have predicted. What do you think Samuel will discover with this book? What are the real secrets behind Millstone? Samuel Roberts no longer knew who to trust. What had previously seemed like a simple child's disappearance had transformed into something much bigger, something that defied logic and rational explanation. Millstone was no longer the peaceful town he had imagined. Every street, every corner now hid secrets he wasn't prepared to uncover. In the days that followed, Samuel's investigations led him to other townspeople, and with each conversation, more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. He began to realize that Sarah Whitaker's disappearance was not an isolated incident. Other disappearances of children and even adults had occurred over the decades, but had always been minimized or forgotten by the town. There was something, or someone, with a silent power over Millstone, and Samuel was determined to expose it. During one of his visits to Sheriff Amos Calloway, Samuel learned of a legend that apparently circulated among the town's elders. The legend of the Night of Shadows, as it was called, spoke of an ancient secret society that had existed in the town since the first settlers. This society, according to the sheriff, performed strange rituals and disappearances to maintain a pact with the beings of the shadows. The story had never been taken seriously, of course, but now, with everything that was happening, Samuel didn't know what to think. "I don't believe in that stuff, Samuel," Calloway said, visibly uncomfortable. "But I can't deny that strange things happen here and people just disappear." When Samuel left the police station, he felt a heavier weight on his shoulders. The legend of the Night of Shadows seemed more like superstition than a real clue, but the things he was beginning to discover about the residents and the city made him question his own beliefs. He was no longer just investigating a crime, but uncovering something that transcends human understanding. That same night, Samuel had an unexpected encounter with William Crane. The man he had so distrusted was waiting for him in the central square, under the light of an iron lamppost, his shadow stretching across the sidewalk. "You're going down the wrong path, Detective," Crane said, without any kind of greeting. His tone was calm, but there was a threatening undertone to his words. "You know what's going on, don't you? You know where Sarah is," Samuel replied, taking the lead in the conversation. His face was tense, his eyes fixed on Crane. William Crane smiled slightly, but the expression on his face was distant, as if he were seeing something beyond Samuel. "I know far more than you imagine, but if you continue to seek answers, you will never be the same. Millstone has its secrets, and some of them should not be unearthed." Samuel, now with a growing sense of urgency, felt the weight of those words. It was clear that Crane was trying to manipulate the situation, but Samuel wouldn't back down. He couldn't. Something much bigger was at stake, and he needed to find out what it was. As Samuel walked away from Crane, a feeling of unease gripped him. He knew he was getting closer to the truth, but he had no idea how dangerous it would be. The following morning, a new clue appeared, another piece of the puzzle. Sarah's mother, Elizabeth Whitaker, had received an anonymous letter with the same handwriting as the first letter Samuel had found in the missing child's house. On the envelope was a simple line, "The key is in the forest. The full moon will bring what is lost." It was a clue that could only be followed that night, when the full moon was at its peak. But what would he find there? Samuel knew that any answer would lead him deeper into Millstone's heart, and he was getting closer to a truth he didn't know if he wanted to know. As he prepared to face what the forest might hold, Samuel had a sudden vision of all the people he had met since arriving in town. Sheriff Calloway, Dr. Hayes, the lady at the bookstore, and now William Crane. They all had something in common, something he couldn't yet understand, but he felt that these characters were somehow connected to what he was searching for. But what exactly were the shadows? And what did the forest have to do with the children's disappearance? Do you believe the shadows are real, or is this all just a figment of Samuel's mind? What will be found in the forest, and what is Crane trying to hide? Night fell swiftly over Millstone, and the sky was tinged a deep blue, with the full moon rising majestically on the horizon. Samuel Roberts felt the growing tension in his chest. He knew that this night would be crucial, perhaps the most important of his life. The forest on the outskirts of town, the place that now seemed to be the epicenter of the mystery, was calling to him. And with that, his decision was made. He would go there and face whatever awaited him. He put on his heavy coat, grabbed a lantern, and without further ado, headed for the forest. The silence of the night was oppressive. Samuel felt the eyes of the city on his back, as if everyone were expecting him to be the one to solve this mystery. But as he advanced along the narrow path, a feeling of unease took hold of his thoughts. Something wasn't right, and he knew it. The forest was dense, the trees twisted and imposing, as if they had intentions of their own. Samuel tried to stay focused, but the sounds around him made him feel increasingly watched. Branches breaking, leaves moving for no apparent reason. Fear, that primal feeling he so desperately avoided, began to creep into his mind. He took a deep breath and continued. Suddenly, the sound of a scream cut through the air. It wasn't a scream of fear, but something different. It was like a call, a voice that seemed to come from within the forest. Samuel stopped abruptly. The flashlight swayed in his hand, and his senses were on high alert. He had heard something, and now he felt he was close to discovering the truth. Something was lurking there, something that couldn't be seen, but was definitely present. He followed the sound, pushing aside branches and bushes as he approached. The silence that enveloped him now was absolute, and then he saw. In the heart of the forest, a clearing opened up, illuminated by the light of the full moon. In the center of the clearing, there was an ancient structure, something like a rudimentary altar, with strange symbols carved into the stones. It was something Samuel would never have imagined finding in the middle of a forest. And there, on his knees, was William Crane. The man was in a trance, his eyes closed, murmuring words Samuel couldn't understand. Around him was a circle of lit candles, and the smell of melting wax mingled with the scent of damp forest earth. Samuel stood motionless for a few seconds, observing the scene in bewilderment. What was Crane doing there? What was he summoning? Before Samuel could move or say anything, the scream he had heard before echoed again, now louder. He looked to the side and saw a figure approaching through the darkness, floating as if levitating above the ground. The figure was a woman, but her skin was pale, almost translucent. Her eyes were completely black, and she had no shadow. An indescribable feeling of terror gripped Samuel. He knew at that moment that he was facing something supernatural. Whatever that woman was, she was connected to William Crane, to the disappearance of the children, and probably to all the mysteries that had surrounded Millstone for generations. "You shouldn't have come, Detective," the woman said, her voice echoing in Samuel's mind like a whisper coming from all directions. "Now that you've seen it, there's no going back." The feeling that something terrible was about to happen washed over Samuel like a wave. He tried to take a step back, but his body wouldn't respond. He was paralyzed, not by pain, but by a primal fear, a force he couldn't comprehend. William Crane, still in a trance, began to recite words faster, more intensely, and the air around Samuel seemed to vibrate. The full moon, shining brightly above, seemed to intensify, casting an otherworldly light on the altar and the woman's figure. The clearing was now immersed in an aura Samuel had never seen, something that defied human comprehension. The figure before him smiled, a smile that was not human, but something else. And then Crane's words came to an end. The sound of the candles going out echoed through the clearing, and the woman raised her hand, pointing directly at Samuel. "Now you're marked," she said, in a voice that seemed to resonate directly in the back of Samuel's mind. "You saw what you shouldn't have, and there's no escaping it now." And at that moment, everything around Samuel seemed to disappear. The clearing, the trees, even William Crane and the woman vanished, leaving only the darkness of the forest and the sound of his own rapid breathing. What do you think Samuel saw in that clearing? What lies behind William Crane's power and the mysterious figure? Samuel woke up in his bed, sweat dripping down his forehead, his heart still racing. The forest, the woman's figure, the aura that had risen around Crane, it all seemed like a vivid nightmare that he couldn't shake from his mind. He sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process what had happened. Every detail was still fresh in his memory, but what terrified him most was the fact that he didn't know if it had been real or just a hallucination, a distortion of his overwhelmed mind. He looked out the window, where the dawn light was beginning to filter through. It was a new day, but Samuel felt that things would never be the same again. He was marked, as the woman had said, but marked for what? What did she mean by those words? And what had happened in the forest when everything disappeared? Weighed down by these thoughts, Samuel stood up and headed to the police station. He needed answers, and time was running out. The city was more nervous than ever. More residents had begun reporting missing animals, and a sense of paranoia gripped the streets. People were starting to whisper about the legend of the Night of Shadows again, and now, more than ever, Samuel believed the city was on the brink of something irreparable. Upon arriving at the police station, he was greeted by a visibly shaken sheriff. "Samuel, are you all right?" asked Amos Calloway, his face pale as if he himself were seeing something he was trying to escape. I don't know. I saw something last night, something I can't understand, And more people are disappearing, Sheriff. More strange things are happening in the city, Samuel replied, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. Amos took a step back, as if wanting to avoid what Samuel was about to say. Don't talk about it anymore, please. I already know everything you're talking about, and you'd better know what's involved in all of this, too. Samuel looked at him confused. What are you saying, Sheriff? Amos sat down in the chair, his eyes brimming with a fear Samuel had never seen him display. I was part of the secret society, Samuel, the Night of Shadows. Me and many others. When the city was founded, we made a pact, an agreement with something we didn't understand. And now the consequences are coming. The disappearance of Sarah Whitaker, what you saw in the forest. All of this is part of something bigger, something much older than the city. Samuel was speechless. He had never imagined that the sheriff, the man who seemed to be the voice of reason in the town, would be involved in something so dark. He sat in the chair opposite Amos, absorbing his words. Why didn't you ever tell me this? Why didn't anyone say anything to me? Samuel asked, his tone revealing the frustration and fear he felt. Because I didn't want you to be dragged into this, Amos said with a heavy sigh. But the truth is, for generations, all the leaders of this city have been part of the Night of Shadows, and now, with what you've discovered, you're trapped in that cycle too. There's no way out, Samuel, unless— And what does that have to do with the missing children? Samuel interrupted, his voice growing more urgent. Amos looked down, avoiding Samuel's gaze. The disappearances, they are sacrifices to keep the pact alive. The city survives through this agreement and the children are chosen. Sarah Whitaker, your mother, they were all involved. They are part of a bloodline. But that's absurd, Samuel shouted, standing up suddenly. How can you say that? How could you have participated in something so horrible? Amos raised his hand, asking for calm. I know it sounds insane, but it's the only explanation. The woman you saw, she's not human. She's part of the shadows. And if you don't do something now, not only will Millstone be swallowed up, but you will be too. Samuel didn't know what to think. He was being dragged into something much bigger than his initial investigation. The city was corroded by an ancient evil, and he was at the center of it all. But what should he do now? It was then that the police station door opened, interrupting the heavy atmosphere of the conversation. A man entered, breathless, his face pale and his eyes wide. Detective, Sheriff, something is happening in the central square. They're here. Samuel and Amos rose quickly, running to the door. In the center of the city, a mysterious figure stood before the square. The Woman of Shadows. And behind her the city seemed to unravel, as if an invisible force were dissolving the fabric of reality. Samuel felt his body tremble. The fight to save Millstone was about to begin, and he knew that the future of the city, and his own, was now intertwined in a game he could no longer escape. What do you think Samuel will do now that he knows about the connection between the sheriff and the Night of Shadows? How can he save Millstone? The central square of Millstone was in chaos. The Shadow Woman stood there, like an ethereal presence, and around her the city seemed distorted, as if the very air were being corrupted. The wind had stopped, the moonlight was more intense than ever, and the silence was unsettling, as if time had slowed down. Samuel felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He knew that the only way to save Millstone was to confront what he now understood to be a force beyond reason. It wasn't just the disappearances and the ancient rituals. It was the very pact of generations that had been maintained in the shadows, fueled by human sacrifices, and which was now reaching its climax. You can't escape, Samuel, the woman said, her voice echoing like an icy whisper in the back of his mind. You're part of this now. There's no going back. Samuel felt a deep chill run through his bones, but he didn't back down. He had no choice. No matter how insane it was, he needed to confront the truth and try to save the city. He looked at the sheriff, who was beside him, with a defeated expression. Sheriff, is there anything we can do? Samuel asked, his voice firm despite his growing fear. Amos Calloway shook his head slowly. I don't know, Samuel. We've tried everything, but the pact has already been made. There's no going back for us. Samuel clenched his fists. He knew the sheriff was right, but he also knew he couldn't surrender to it. He couldn't allow the town to be swallowed by the evil lurking in the shadows. He remembered the woman's words. "You're part of it now." But Samuel refused to believe it. He still had a choice, and he would make the right choice. "If this is what the city has become, then I'm the only one who can change it," Samuel said, more to himself than to the sheriff. He glanced at the woman's figure, who observed everything with an enigmatic smile. The woman slowly raised her hands, and with a gentle movement, the shadows around the square began to stir, as if responding to her summons. The ground trembled slightly, and suddenly the streets around the square grew darker, as if an invisible veil were covering the entire city. The city's aura was transforming, and shadows were dominating every corner. But Samuel knew he couldn't be consumed by fear. He had seen the power of that force, and now he had to use his courage to confront it. "I'm not part of this. I won't let you take Millstone," Samuel shouted, his words cutting through the heavy air. "You can control the shadows, but I have something you can't control." The woman smiled with a disdainful air. "And what do you have, Samuel? What can defeat that which never ages? What is older than time, deeper than fear?" Samuel looked at the altar in the square, the same altar he had seen in the forest. The book, The Art of Arcana, which he found in Sarah Whitaker's house and in William Crane's bookstore. He remembered the words written in the book. "When the full moon rises, the veil between the worlds will be torn." Samuel wasn't entirely sure what it meant, but he felt that this moment was a turning point. He could no longer rely on theories. He needed to act. "If you're from another world, then I'll make you see what the real world can do," Samuel shouted loudly as he approached the altar. The shadow woman laughed, a sound that echoed through the streets. "You don't understand, Samuel. You can't save anyone. This is our world now." But Samuel was already kneeling before the altar, and with a swift movement he took the book. He opened it, even without knowing what to do with the words written there. And when his hands touched the pages, a jolt of energy coursed through his body. The book began to glow, its light pulsing in rhythm with Samuel's heart. He felt a wave of power, not coming from the shadows, but from the very earth, from the city, from the people who lived there. In an instant, Samuel realized he didn't need to defeat the shadows. He needed to reverse the pact, break the cycle of sacrifices. He was fighting for what Millstone truly was, a city, a community. The strength of the people who had always lived there, the relationships they shared, that was more powerful than any dark pact. He shouted again, but this time his words were imbued with something stronger, something more real. "Millstone will not be consumed. I break this pact." As he spoke these words, a wave of light shone from the book and spread across the square, causing the shadows to recede. The shadow woman screamed in agony, her hands raised, trying to resist the force that was surging from within Samuel. And then, with a dull, trembling sound, the veil that covered the city was torn. The darkness vanished, and the full moon shone brightly, illuminating Millstone with a purifying light. The shadows dissipated, and the woman, now weakened, disappeared into the darkness. The power of the shadows had been broken, but the cost was high. Samuel felt a profound exhaustion, as if his entire being had been drained. But he knew the city was saved. Do you believe Samuel truly broke the pact, or is evil merely dormant? What will he face now that Millstone is free? Dawn broke in Millstone, silent, as if the city were breathing a sigh of relief after the dark night had finally come to an end. Samuel Roberts stood in the center of the square, watching the golden light that began to flood the buildings and streets. The city, which had previously seemed trapped in shadows and mystery, now seemed more alive, brighter. The weight he felt in his chest had lessened, but something in his mind was still restless. He knew the battle was far from over. The shadow woman had vanished, but he sensed there was more to face. The pact had been broken, but the city was on the verge of a transformation Samuel didn't fully comprehend. The night before, when the veil of shadows finally lifted, Samuel felt a profound connection to Millstone, as if he were now part of something much larger. He knew that somehow the people of the town had been protected, but how long would that last? Sheriff Amos Calloway appeared behind him, with an expression of weariness and relief. We did it, Samuel, but not without a price." Samuel turned to him, his eyes heavy. "The price was high, but the city is saved for now." Calloway gazed at the square, his eyes distant. "You broke the pact, but what's left? What will Millstone be now? The town will never be the same again, and evil may just be waiting." Samuel knew the sheriff was right. The shadow of the shadows still loomed over Millstone. Even though the town was now free, transformation was inevitable. He knew he couldn't relax. There was something inside him, a premonition, that prevented him from believing that evil had truly been eradicated. But what could it be? Before he could answer the sheriff, a figure approached the square. It was Elizabeth Whitaker, Sarah's mother. She seemed calmer than in previous weeks, but there was something in her gaze that seemed deeper. She approached Samuel with a shy smile, but at the same time her gaze carried a weight. "Samuel, I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I never thought I would see my daughter again. But what you did, it was beyond anything I could have imagined." Samuel smiled sadly. "You have nothing to thank me for. I only did what I had to do. But Sarah is at peace now." She looked at him, and for a moment there was a heavy silence. I know you did everything you could, but you must know, Samuel, not everything has been revealed. The pact wasn't just with the residents of Millstone. Sarah was chosen because she had something you haven't discovered yet." Samuel felt a flutter in his stomach. "What are you saying, Elizabeth?" She looked around, as if afraid someone might be listening, before drawing even closer to Samuel. "She wasn't the first child chosen, and perhaps she won't be the last. The pact isn't limited to the shadows. There was something more to Sarah, something she inherited. The truth about her is still hidden." Before Samuel could ask any more questions, Elizabeth turned quickly, as if seized by an invisible force. She looked at Samuel one last time, with a look that seemed to apologize. "There's something more for you to discover, Samuel, something you don't yet understand, and I fear the worst is yet to come." With those words, she turned away quickly, disappearing down the streets of Millstone. Samuel stood there, absorbing her words. What was so special about Sarah, the missing child? The pact, though broken, seemed to be only a part of something much bigger. The city, the history, everything was intertwined in a way he still couldn't comprehend. He gazed at the horizon. The city was at peace, but in his mind he knew the answers he sought were yet to come. Something was lurking, something he had not yet faced. And as he prepared for what was to come, he sensed a familiar presence approaching. William Crane. Crane appeared at the edge of the square, his gaze somber and distant, but this time there was something different about his face. He was paler, weaker, and in his eyes there was a silent recognition. "You really don't understand what you've done, Samuel," Crane said, his voice low and serious. "The city may be saved, but not for long. What you broke isn't just a pact, it's a cycle. And it will return. Sooner or later, Millstone will be swallowed up again." Samuel didn't know if Crane was trying to scare him or if he was telling the truth. But one thing was clear. The battle wasn't over. The city was free, but the war against the shadows, the pact, and the forces he didn't understand was far from over. What did Elizabeth mean by Sarah? What is so special about her that Samuel doesn't yet know? And will the shadow cycle really return? The sky over Millstone was now filled with dark clouds, as if the city were about to be engulfed by a storm. The streets were empty. But Samuel sensed the presence of something imminent, something he could no longer ignore. The pact had been broken, but as William Crane had said, the cycle was not over. Something was about to happen, and Millstone, even after all it had been through, was still in danger. Samuel headed to the city library, the only place where he still believed he could find an explanation for what was to come. With each step, the feeling of despair only grew. He had already seen what the shadows were capable of, what the pact demanded, but now he needed to find a way to break the cycle once and for all. He needed to understand what Elizabeth Whittaker had been trying to tell him about Sarah. The library was quiet, the silence heavy. Samuel approached the old bookcase where he had found the Art of Arcana. Now he needed to find more answers, more clues on how to destroy evil once and for all. He pulled out several old books and, after a long search, found a page that seemed relevant. It was a note in the margins of an old book about the founding of Millstone and the city's pact. He read it carefully. The pact can never be broken without the chosen one, the bearer of the bloodline, sacrificing themselves. Millstone will survive, but the darkness will be eternal until the last descendant of Sarah Whittaker surrenders their soul to the shadows. Samuel swallowed hard. He understood now. The pact hadn't just been about children being sacrificed. Sarah Whittaker hadn't been chosen randomly. She was part of an ancient bloodline, and the truth about the sacrifice was buried deep within Millstone's history. And now he knew what was coming. The city was in danger because there was a bloodline that needed to be sacrificed for the cycle of shadows to be fulfilled, and that bloodline was still alive. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Samuel turned and saw William Crane, his gaze cold and penetrating, as if he knew exactly what was happening. "I knew you'd figure this out, Samuel. You've always been good at connecting the dots. But now, what will you do with this truth?" Crane asked, his voice low, almost soft, but laden with a menacing tone. "I will prevent this from happening, no matter the cost," Samuel replied firmly. He looked at the book that was still open in front of him, the moonlight streaming through the library windows, as if everything was aligning for the event that was about to take place. Crane smiled, a smile that wasn't human, but one that overflowed with malicious confidence. "You don't understand, do you? The cycle has always been like this, Samuel. Millstone survives because the pact is kept. It's always been that way. Sarah Whittaker's lineage is the key, and without it, there is no more city. There is nothing left." Samuel couldn't believe what he was hearing. "So you're saying that all the suffering in Millstone, all the missing children, all the sacrifices, all of that was part of a plan to keep the town alive? That's monstrous." Crane stepped forward, as if preparing to reveal the final secret. "You're right, Samuel, but the real secret is that Sarah Whittaker was the last. There are no more descendants. She was the last chosen one. The pact can never be fulfilled." A wave of understanding and dread washed over Samuel. "But then, what does this mean?" "It means the shadows want what is theirs. And if the sacrifice isn't made, the cycle you destroyed will return in full force. There will be no more city. There will be nothing left. Evil will spread. Darkness will consume everything." Crane spoke with terrifying calm, as if he had already accepted the inevitable end. Samuel knew that time was running out. He couldn't let this happen. The cycle of shadows needed to be broken once and for all. He closed the book and gripped it tightly, his hands trembling, but with unwavering determination. "I will destroy this. I will destroy everything that keeps evil alive in Millstone." Crane looked at him, now with a frustrated expression. "You think you can? You think you can challenge something that has existed for centuries? Prepare for the end, Samuel. What you are about to face is not something you can defeat." Samuel took a step toward Crane, his gaze fierce. "I don't know what the future holds for Millstone, but I know the fight can't end like this. Not with more sacrifices, not with more children disappearing. The air around them began to churn. The shadows in the library began to move, growing and writhing, as if preparing to rebel against the last vestige of light. Samuel felt the power of the shadows growing, trying to pull him into the darkness. But he was ready. He gripped the book tighter, closing his eyes and murmuring the words he remembered from The Art of Arcana. He knew this was his last chance. The pact needed to be destroyed once and for all. "Millstone will be free," Samuel said loudly, and with a final cry he opened the book, and the light shone brightly, illuminating the entire library. The shadows began to dissipate, but not without a struggle, in a final battle of light against darkness. Do you think Samuel will be able to destroy the Shadow Pact once and for all? Or will it be too late for Millstone? What will happen to the city after the climax of this final battle? The light of the Art of Arcana, it blinded Samuel as he held the book open, its pages gleaming with an intensity he could never have imagined. The library was filled with an indescribable energy, as if the space itself were being reshaped from within. The shadows, those dark presences that had tormented Millstone for so long, began to disappear, being pulled into the book. They struggled, they resisted, but they were being consumed by the force Samuel had unleashed. He was exhausted, his body ached, but the feeling of triumph was unmistakable. The shadows could no longer maintain the cycle. The evil that had fed on the city for generations was finally being banished. But at the same time, Samuel knew the fight hadn't been easy. The price to destroy that pact, that cycle of terror, had been high. He felt as if he were leaving something of himself behind, something irretrievable. When the last shadow was consumed by the light, the book slammed shut. Samuel fell to his knees, breathing heavily. The weight of what had happened weighed heavily upon him, but a part of his soul was at peace. Millstone was free. The sound of footsteps broke the silence that followed, and Samuel looked up. He saw William Crane again, but this time something was different about his expression. There was no longer arrogance in his gaze, nor the menacing tone. He was silent, as if he had accepted something he could not change. "You did the impossible, Samuel," Crane said, with an expression of respect but also of sadness. "The city is free, but what's left of it all? At what cost?" Samuel looked at him, his eyes deep. "The cost was the truth, Crane, but the city has a chance now, and that's what matters." The rain began to fall outside the window. The sound of the drops hitting the glass was like soft music, a melody that signaled the end of an era of shadows and the beginning of a new phase for Millstone. Elizabeth Whitaker entered the library. Her face was serene, but her eyes held the pain of someone who had lost so much. I don't know how to thank you, Samuel," she said, her voice faltering slightly. Samuel stood up with difficulty. "You have nothing to thank me for, Elizabeth. What happened, what your daughter was, is in the past. Evil can't return." She looked at him with silent gratitude. "But what will become of Millstone now? And what will you do?" Samuel thought for a moment, watching the rain outside, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. He knew the city was free, but the future was uncertain. It could never be the same again. He had given everything for Millstone, but all that remained now was to rebuild. "I don't know. But I know that Millstone, even with its shadows, has a future. Maybe I'll leave. But I'll leave the city in the hands of those who want to rebuild it," said Samuel, with renewed determination. "Millstone will be what its people want it to be." The rain stopped suddenly, and a soft light streamed through the window, illuminating the city with a clarity that seemed new, as if the weight of history had finally been lifted. Millstone would no longer be a city marked by darkness. Now it would be a place of hope, a place of reconstruction. Samuel looked one last time at the faces of the people around him. There were no more shadows. There were no more fears. There was only freedom. Do you think Samuel made the right choice in abandoning Millstone, or should he have stayed to help with the reconstruction? What will become of the city's future now? If you felt drawn into Samuel's fight against the shadows and Millstone's journey, be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think really happened to the town? Could evil return, or has Millstone truly found peace? What was the most impactful moment for you in this story? Share your theories and reflections. And don't forget to invite friends to join the discussion. Your feedback can inspire a new story. Who knows what comes next? The journey continues, and you're a part of it.